Hi, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to have a look at the air channel strip, and I'm going to go over the functions and some of the ways that I would use it when mixing in the standalone MPC. Let's jump in. So here we have the air channel strip. We have some meters here for in, out, gate and compression gain reduction. Here we can switch on the processing. We have the output section. We have the EQ section here, which is a low shelf, sweepable mids and a high shelf. We have a high pass filter here. On page 2 we have the controls for the gate and the compressor. Now, as far as I can work out, but don't quote me on it, the chain works in the following order: high pass filter into the compressor, and then we have the EQ. With the gate, I think the gate comes before the compressor. So it's a little bit misleading here because, like I said, as far as I can work out, the EQ is not the first, it's actually the high pass filter. Now, the way that I worked that out, but honestly, please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. The way that I worked that out is I took a kick drum or a sound, for instance. We've got the kick drum here. I went into the compressor section and I brought the compression down. Let's take it to about there, so that I was getting roughly about 10 decibels gain reduction. So you can see here I'm getting about 10. I then went back to the EQ section. Now, if the EQ came before the compressor, if I was to really push the bass or drop the bass, it's going to affect the gain reduction because it's going to be going into the compressor, so it's going to affect that. So if I take the gain and let's just push it right up. Still on minus 10 gain reduction. Let's take it all the way down. Still on minus 10 gain reduction. So from that, I established that the EQ does not go before the compressor, and whatever you do in the EQ section is not going to affect how you're compressing, the gain reduction, how the compressor behaves, etc. So let's take that back to 0. But then what I did was I used the high pass filter. So if you look what happens when I roll the high pass filter up, let's take it up to there, a bit further, all the way to 1000 Hertz, you can see that that affects how the compressor behaves. So from there I ascertained that the high pass filter comes before the compressor and then the EQ comes afterwards. So I'm going to demonstrate the air channel strip on a house beat, a boom bap style beat and a vocal. I'm going to run through them very, very quickly and just really go through some of the moves that I would do if I was mixing down these particular sources. It's not going to be the finished product, but I just want to kind of show you how quickly you can get yourself in the ballpark with the air channel strip, which is obviously the major advantage of it. So we're going to start off with the house beat, which is just kicks, snare, clap and hi-hat, and I'll run through some of the moves and explain some of the reasons why I make those moves. So we're starting off with the kick drum here. Okay, so what I've done there, very, very quickly, the fundamental's probably around about 60 Hertz, but I liked how it sounded around about 70, so I've given that a bit of a boost with the low shelf. I will say that this is kind of a bit like an SSL EQ. You can crank it right up and it's still quite transparent, so you know, don't look at the numbers and think, am I pushing this too far? Just shut your eyes if you like, use your ears. I've taken a little bit of mud out because I found the tail of the kick drum was a little bit muddy. So just around about 200 Hertz, and it just cleans the kick drum up, gives you a little bit more control over it. Haven't touched anything in the highs at all. Probably best to just keep the gate off if you're not going to be using it. So just bear that in mind. I will show the gate on a vocal, but I'm not really that massively impressed by the gate on this, to be honest. And yeah, let's just leave it at that. Turn the gate off unless you really, really want to use it. With the compressor, I wanted to just give the kick drum a little bit of punch. So ratio, where I would have it probably on a DBX 160, which is a really good compressor for drums. I've let the transient through, so I've taken the attack back to around about 27-30 milliseconds. Short release, and it just gives the kick drum a bit of punch. So I'm hoping that you're hearing that on headphones, or if you've got a really decent sound system, but there's just a lot more girth in the low end. And it's just really filling out the lower part of the frequency range, which is what I obviously want to do with a kick. So if we now go into the snare drums, which I think are these two, start with the snare drum. Can probably lose some of the low end on this. Not too much. Running on the snare drums, you get a nice bit of body, sometimes around about 200, between 200 and 300. So I don't want to roll off too much, but I just want to get rid of anything. If, for example, it was sampled off a piece of vinyl, you might have some rumble in there. So it's a good idea to get rid of that. And even with some sample packs as well, the low end's not being cleaned up. So, you know, listen to the low end, but be careful, you know, don't roll off everything. I've said this in previous videos because, you know, sometimes you can lose a little bit of weight and a bit of girth to the sound, and you don't want to. Even with hi-hats, you know, you trust your ears, and it's different for every sound as well. Don't apply the same setting to every single sound. So I've taken any kind of low end information that I don't really need. With sounds like this, a good rule of thumb is to take the high pass filter up to the point where you can start hearing it having an actual effect, and then just take it back a little bit, because that way you're not really getting rid of any of the sound that you really, really want. And also listen to it in the context of the mix. Want a little bit of air on it. It's probably going to start around about the 5K mark. And then just a little bit of compression to give it a bit of smack. Compensate with the output. So as you hear, I've cleaned it up. With house music, you tend to want to keep things quite clean. Not always, you know, you can have lo-fi sounds as well, but with this particular snare drum, I want to clean things up so you can hear that I've cleaned things up with that and given it a little bit of smack with the compression. So moving on to the clap. Just open that up. Again, we can probably lose some of the low end. This sounds like it needs cleaning up a little bit in the muddy. Again, a little bit of compression. So again, you can hear that I've cleaned up the clap, given it a little bit of brightness, bit of clarity, and just a little bit of compression on it as well. There's kind of almost a little kind of resonant frequency in the clap, which is probably what I've cleaned up around about here. A bit nasally, a bit boxy. You can probably hear it better on headphones. Okay, into the hi-hats, which are these two. Okay, let's just go in here. This you can probably lose some of the low end as well. Brighten it up a little bit. Maybe a little bit of bite, round about 5k. Maybe a little bit less actually. So yeah, you can start hearing it if you really push the level. So roll that back just a little bit. Always remember to take the gate off. I should probably set up my own default actually with the gate switched off, because it's very easy to forget, and it can make a little bit of a difference, so you have to watch that. With this hat, it's quite a lo-fi hat, which I think I've sampled off an old house track, so that's going to take, let's get rid of the low end, maybe even a little bit more. Little bit of compression. I want the attack quite fast on that because I want to soften it a little bit, because it's kind of a background hat that's okay. So obviously, because I've got these all on individual channels, it's not very easy to A and B them, which is one disadvantage of having it on separate channels rather than mixing it on a bus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it play with everything on, and then I'll play with everything switched off, but I'll make the cut in the video so it's easier to hear. So let's just play it with all the processing. So now moving on to a boom bap style beat. Now all of these samples are from vinyl, not sample packs, so they're a little bit puny, bit weak, and I've done that on purpose. So I'm going to use the air channel strip on each individual sound to get some nice girth in the low end and just crisp it all up a little bit and just to make it sound more cohesive, more gelled together. But I'm going to go through it very, very quickly. I think there's 4 sounds in total. So I tend to go through kick, snare, hi-hats in that order generally, and then make any kind of little tweaks that I need to make. So we'll start off with the kick drum. See, you can really crank it, but it's given that kick drum some weight, and it was a really, really, really weak kick drum, to be honest, without. So I want to give this snare drum a little bit of body, because again it's quite a weak snare drum, and this is why this kind of body area for snare drums, most snare drums around about 200 to sort of 350 is where you can give it a little bit of body. So with the hi-hats, got rid of the low end and given it a little bit of crispness and bite at about 1300, and then brightened it up with the high shelf. Used the compressor again just to tighten things up a little bit. Again, very, very subtle, but it gets me in the ballpark super, super fast. Actually, let's use that to get some clarity from it. Again, just using the compressor just to get some control over it and give it a little bit of a snap. And using the EQ, again, just to give it a little bit of brightness because it's the hi-hat and it's sampled off an old record and I just wanted to brighten it up a little bit. So again, I'm not going to be able to turn everything off all at once because they're all on separate pads. So I'll do a before, or sorry, I'll do an after and then I'll do a before. So this is with everything on. So finally, I'm going to show you the channel strip on a vocal. Quite a kind of poppy vocal. It's quite balanced already.
You're just not getting it, kid. I really wish you'd quit.
But it sounds very dry and there's not an awful lot of character to it. This kind of vocal, for instance, with kind of poppy stuff, or well, actually with any genres really. Nowadays, people like to really bring the vocal to the front, balance it kind of right out. So they use quite a lot of compression. And the air channel strip is nice for that. It's got a nice kind of SSL sound to the compressor, and then using some EQ as well. So I have this set up already, but I'll show you what I did to actually get to this point. So I'll play it without, and then I'll drop the processing in.
You're just not getting it, kid. I really wish you'd quit. You're just not getting it, kid. I really wish you'd quit. Just take one of many hints you've been given. My God, just leave me alone. We were good friends.
So you can hear with the compression and the EQ, when it's dry, there's a little bit of muddiness. There's not an awful lot of brightness. It's a little bit unbalanced in the levels just because that's how humans are. And with the compression, what I've done, it's about a ratio of 3, so it's doing some work. It's not, you know, it's not a subtle compression at all. With the attack, I've not got a super fast attack because I don't really want to round off the vocals, but I do want to get some control over them a little bit and just not make her sound so harsh, make it a lot more balanced and a lot smoother. And it's kind of a compression setup that you would do on a pop vocal. And then with the release is quite long. With the gate, as you can see, if you watch what the gate does here in between the gaps.
You're just not getting it, kid. I really wish you'd quit. Just take one of many hints you've been given. My God, just...
So you can see it's jumping in some of the gaps because of the way that I've got the release and the attack and the depth and the threshold set up. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because I will do another video on actual gates as such. But the job that I want it to do is just to kind of give a bit of punctuation to the vocal. So the depth's rolled all the way down, so when the gate kicks in, it's kicking in completely and almost shaving the ends and the starts off, if you know what I mean. So in a similar way that a compressor would affect the transients and the tail of the vocal, but it just makes it sound, in the mix, it would make the vocal sound a bit more punchy and a bit more punctual and a bit more in your face, rather than having kind of long drifty tails. And it's almost getting rid of the nuances in her voice and making her sound, I don't want to say robotic, but just a little bit more in your face and just straight and there, you know, which is what you want with a kind of vocal like this. With a pop vocal, you don't really want it, you don't want too many nuances in there, you just want it in your face. So I've used the gate in that way on this, and I've used the compression in that way on this. Now with the EQ, I've rolled off the low end just purely for the reason that there is a tiny bit of mic rumble, so I've got rid of that. And I've also taken the shelf up to about 235 to kind of get rid of any mud as well in her voice, because there was a little bit, and that's just not, well, maybe not necessarily her voice, maybe the microphone, where she was standing in relation to the microphone, how she was singing, in what direction across the microphone, etc. All these things can come into account. And then I've given her a little bit of bite and brightened her vocals up around about 1.5, and then I've given her some air up the top, which is not really something you notice so much when you put it in there, but when you take it out you do start noticing it. So again, let's just play her vocal.
You're just not getting it, kid. I really wish you'd quit. Just take one of many hints you've been given. My God, just leave me alone. You're just not getting it, kid. You're just not getting it, kid. You're just not getting it, kid.
You see, so it just gives her vocal a little bit of air.
You're just not getting it, kid. I really wish you'd quit. Just take one of many hints you've been given. My God, just leave me alone.
And it just, for me, I mean, it's difficult to really judge it because it's not in the mix, it's just an a cappella, but it just makes the vocal sound more finished, more, a bit posh, a bit sort of, you know, giving it a bit more control and a bit more punchiness, a bit more in your face, a bit up front, and just some air, and just got rid of all the kind of frequencies which you don't really want. So there you have it, the air channel strip. Now obviously the advantages of using the air channel strip is that you only use one slot and you've got EQ, gate and compression. So, you know, it's a really good way of getting yourself in the ballpark very, very quickly on individual instruments. The disadvantages of it are you don't have as much control as you would have if you had separate parametric EQ, separate compressor, separate gate, and obviously as well you can't change the order of the processing in the air channel strip. It'd be really, really cool if you could. I don't know whether that's something that Akai could do in the future. For instance, on an SSL desk or whatever, you can change whether the EQ comes before or after, or the dynamics become before or after the EQ, etc. So it'd be nice to be able to do that. But you know, at present you can't change the order. So yeah, the advantages are you can get in the ballpark very, very quickly and you only take up one slot. Because of the type of plugin and that you don't have maximum control, it's something that I would probably tend to use, me personally, on individual instruments rather than a group of instruments or on the master. But that's not to say that you can't use it on the master and you can't use it on a group of instruments, because you absolutely can. But for me personally, probably because I'm a mastering engineer, so it's just a way that I tend to think, is I like to have absolute control over the EQ, absolute control over the compression, and you don't get that absolute control with the air channel strip. It's a kind of ballpark way of very, very quickly getting control and getting the right sound of your instruments. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing, mastering and MPC tutorials and reviews. This is the Quakes Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.